That was amazing. All right. Good morning and welcome to the UU Church of South Hills, also known as Sunnyhill. We are delighted that you could join us for this service. Our mission at Sunnyhill is to create a more just and compassionate community within and beyond our walls. My name is Roxy Mountjoy, and I serve as a worship associate for this congregation. If you're a newcomer or a visitor to our congregation, please go to sunnyhill.org and click on the button that says New to Sunnyhill to receive more information about our congregation and to receive our weekly email newsletter. If you're joining us online today, please say hello or good morning in the comments on Facebook or YouTube. We'd like to hear from you and extend a welcome to you as well. Today's service explores the roots of Memorial Day, which began as Decoration Day in the immediate aftermath of the Civil War, when formerly enslaved African Americans held a series of commemorations to mark the end of the war. This service will explore the deep roots of Memorial Day and how those roots might change the way we experience this holiday in our own era. Our opening words were written by Gretchen Haley. There is too much beauty in this world to give up on it yet, and it is always too soon to surrender to cynicism. Bring your doubt, your skepticism, your downright confusion, even your bitterness. But in the midst of all these, in the center, wrap your tender fingers around that still, bright thread of hope. Feel in your heart that still, steady hunger for something more, the vision we glimpse every day in the rising sun, across the foothills, the light that spreads, across the face of the one we love, the look of knowing, all there is to know and still loving life, loving us, just as it is, just as we are. For this hour we come to celebrate, to praise, to give thanks, to refuse to give up, to steady ourselves, keepers of hope, brave builders of this still possible world. Please join me in saying the words to light our chalice. We light this beacon of hope, sign of our quest for truth and meaning in celebration of the life we share together.
I think I speak for all of us when I can say that it's been a really rough week. A lot of pain and suffering. In the midst of all this pain and suffering, we are called, in the words of a colleague of mine, Ian Riddell, to walk with the wanderers, to sing and dance with the worshipers, and to wrap the despairing and the broken in the arms of love and community. In that spirit, I ask you to please rise and bow your spirit, and Mary will tell us how we're going to sing this.
It's around. So we'll sing all together in unison 2 times through, and then this brave section will start us off with the first part around. I'll hang with you guys. Jim's going to hang with the middle, and Dennis has just volunteered to lead the far left. Far left, guys. That's what you are.
Come, come, whoever you are, wanderer, worshiper, lover of leaving. Ours is no caravan of despair. Come yet again, come.
All together one more time.
Come, come, whoever you are, wanderer.
For each of us, there are certain sights, sounds, or smells that signal to us that it's okay to be at peace. It might be the aroma of dinner cooking, or the sight of your spouse at the end of the day, or the sound of your family or your neighbors settling in for the night. For people in the United States military, there's a special signal that says, "You're okay and you're at peace." It's a melody called taps, and it's only 24 notes long. It was composed by a general in the Civil War and his bugler. It's hard to remember how important bugle calls were in the military once upon a time. In the days before radio, bugle calls were the only way military units could communicate to groups over a large area. In the 1860s, the end of the day was important. If there was time and peace enough to play taps, that was a signal that the camp was relatively safe. It meant that you were not under attack. It meant that there were no enemy soldiers to worry about. To a camp of soldiers, the notes of taps meant that unless you were on duty, you can close your eyes and sleep in peace. They say that the first time taps was played at a service for fallen soldiers also took place during the Civil War. In those days, the traditional military salute was, and still is, the firing of a 3-round volley of rifles. But this one time, they say, was after a long battle, when finally a ceasefire had been called, and both sides had stopped to bury their dead. In one camp, as the work ended and the memorial service began to take shape, the soldiers knew that sounding the artillery salute might be taken as a return to fighting, and not as a sacred memorial. Someone had the idea of sounding a bugle, and that sound would never be taken as an aggressive act of war. Taps came to mean the same thing. It meant the safe and quiet end to the day. Time to rest, time to turn the lights out, to let their eyes close, and as best they could, to be at peace. That's what taps means. It's like a powerful prayer. This weekend, many people in the United States are remembering and honoring all those who have died while serving in our military. As we listen to taps now, I invite you to think of every soldier who might have been afraid, and then let taps remind you that they're now at peace. If there are any children present, you're welcome to join us downstairs for our religious education class, where we will also be learning about Decoration Day. Come on down.
One of the saddest aspects of America in our current era is the number of times that we've had to bear witness to the horror of mass shootings, including the recent incidents in Buffalo and in Texas. We have now had more than 200 mass shootings so far in the year 2022 in the US, according to the Gun Violence Archive, which defines a mass shooting as an incident in which 4 or more people are shot and or killed. Our hearts ache for the victims and their friends and families When we think of the hundreds of lives that each of these lives touched, it's clear that many thousands have been directly affected by these horrific incidents. Our hearts ache for those who are on the front lines of dealing with these tragedies, grief and crisis counselors, emergency and medical personnel, law enforcement officers, and others. So many have been traumatized by the sheer scale of suffering and death. Our hearts ache for those whose past traumas are triggered every time a new school shooting occurs. Many thousands of people are forced to relive some of the most tragic and harrowing moments of their lives time and again. In the midst of all of this heartache, we are also appalled and discouraged by our elected officials' seeming unwillingness or inability to enact legislation that might mitigate this senseless violence. While we are not naive enough to believe that such legislation would prevent all or perhaps even most of these shootings, we also know that inaction on this issue is shameful and inexcusable. In an era when many of our elected representatives have refused to consider even the most meager of firearm ordinances and regulations, it is incumbent on people, you and me, to make our voices heard. Inaction and silence are not options for any person of conscience. Doing nothing is the equivalent of passing a death sentence on the thousands of people who will be killed by gun violence in the coming months and years. As I have said before, grieve, yes, but act too. Let our elected representatives know the gun lobby is not the only group that matters in our country. Let them know that we are watching. Let them know that the failure to act is not just cowardly, it is malevolent, sinister, and utterly unacceptable. Love demands action. Compassion demands action. Justice demands action now. Please stop by our social justice table, which is outside on our front lawn after the service, for a postcard signing to our elected officials. Also, if you haven't heard already, Sunnyhill is chartering a bus to go to Washington, D.C. for the March for Our Lives on June 11th. And there are still seats available on that bus. Find Bethany Thornton for more information about how you can sign up for that trip. In addition, there will be a community meeting on gun sense reform here at Sunnyhill this Tuesday at 7 p.m. So there are several ways that you can take action now. I will now light a special candle for the victims of gun violence, for their families and friends, and for all who live in terror, afraid for their own lives and the lives of their children and loved ones.
This is my song, O God of all the nations, a song of peace for lands afar and mine. This is my home, the country where my heart is. but other hearts in other lands are beating with hopes and dreams as true and high as mine. My country's skies are bluer than the ocean, and sunlight beams on clover leaf and pine. But other lands have sunlight too, and clover, and skies are everywhere as blue as mine. Oh, hear my song, thou God of all the nations, a song of peace for their land and for mine.
This is the time in our service when we share joys or sorrows that have been submitted by members of the congregation. After each joy or sorrow that I share, please respond by saying, "We hold you in our hearts." A sorrow submitted on behalf of our caring team. Former longtime member Bob Trivis died last week. He died peacefully at 86 years old. He and his wife, Heather Newman Trivis, were living in Sun City, Florida. To all of Bob's friends and family members, we hold you in our hearts. A joy from Joe Shaughnessy. Joe says, "I just wanted to thank the Beloved Conversations team, the choir, and everyone who was involved in putting on an amazing service last week." Joe says, "In my 10+ years of attending Sunnyhill, I think it might have been one of the best and most important services I've witnessed. Kudos to all." To our Beloved Conversations team and to everyone engaged in the work of dismantling systems of oppression, we hold you in our hearts. Please join me in the spirit of meditation or prayer. We set aside this Memorial Day weekend as a time of remembrance, to remember all who have perished, soldiers and civilians, those who chose to put themselves in harm's way, and those who simply found themselves in the wrong place and wrong time. They lie together in graveyards scattered around the globe, some near their homes, others in far-flung places where they were unknown, strangers in a strange land, far from family and friends. Let us take a moment of silence to remember all these and more. As we remember those who have died, May we be true to their memory in courage and in faith. May we be as compassionate as we are resolute, as merciful as we are determined, as caring as we are sorrowful and aggrieved, more filled with love than with fear. May we carry the memories of those who have died that we might give and receive life more abundantly. No one prays more fervently for peace than a soldier's family and friends. So do we pray for peace, peace in our war-torn world, peace for all those who have lost loved ones, peace for the souls of those who have died, peace for the walking wounded, peace for all. Amen.
Spirit of life, come unto me. Sing in my heart all the stirrings of compassion. Blow in the wind, rise in the sea, move in the hand, giving life the shape of justice. Roots hold me close, wings set me free. Spirit of life, come to me, come to me.
The short version of our nation's origin myth goes something like the following. The United States began with Columbus's discovery of America, continued with the settlement at Plymouth Rock by the Pilgrims. Country won its independence from England in the American Revolution, later survived the Civil War and expanded westward until it became the enormous, rich nation that it is today. As I've mentioned before, that particular myth leaves out some pretty important details, like the slaughter and decimation of indigenous peoples, the enslavement of Africans upon whose backs the American economy was built, and the seizure of land from Mexico in what is now the American Southwest through violent conquest, among many other things. But within the framework of our dominant origin myth, Memorial Day fits in just after the Civil War, when a divided America, at least according to the myth, put aside its differences buried its war dead, both in the South and in the North, and moved on. Memorial Day was thought to be a day to honor those who died on both sides during that war. And lest we forget, some 625,000 or more soldiers died during the Civil War. If the same number of Americans per capita had died in Vietnam as died in the Civil War, 4 million names would be on the Vietnam Veterans Memorial instead of 58,000. The post-Civil War era was a time of incredible loss and intense mourning. It's also worth noting that as many as 2/3 of the soldiers who died did so as a result of diseases such as typhoid, dysentery, and malaria, which resonates in some ways with our own pandemic era. At any rate, Memorial Day, according to our national myth, was when our country started healing. Many of us were taught that the holiday began in 1868 when the Union veterans group, the Grand Army of the Republic, instituted the practice of decorating the graves who died in the war on May 30th of each year, a practice that quickly spread through both the North and the South. In some parts of the country, it was known as Decoration Day, and it still is known by that name in some places. But of course, nothing is ever quite as simple or straightforward as the myth. In fact, the first celebration of Memorial Day apparently took place on May 1st of 1865 in Charleston, South Carolina. I'm grateful for the following description of this event, which comes from an article written by David Blight, a professor of history at Yale University. During the final year of the war, the Confederates had converted Charleston's Washington Racecourse and Jockey Club into an outdoor prison. Union captives were kept in horrible conditions in the interior of the track. At least 257 prisoners died of disease and were hastily buried in a mass grave behind the grandstand. After the Confederate evacuation of Charleston, Black workmen went to the site, reburied the Union dead properly, and built a high fence around the cemetery. They painted the fence and built an archway over the entrance on which they inscribed the words, "Martyrs of the Racecourse." The symbolic power of this Low Country planters' aristocracy's bastion was not lost on the freed people, who then, on May 1st, 1865, in cooperation with several white clergy and teachers, staged a parade of 10,000 people on the track. A New York Tribune correspondent witnessed the event, describing a procession of friends and mourners the likes of which South Carolina and the United States never saw before. The procession was led by 3,000 Black school children carrying armloads of roses and singing the Union marching song, "John Brown's Body." Several hundred Black women followed with baskets of flowers, wreaths, and crosses. Then came Black men marching in cadence, followed by contingents of Union infantrymen. Within the cemetery enclosure, a Black children's choir sang "We'll Rally Round the Flag," the Star-Spangled Banner, and spirituals before a series of Black ministers read from the Bible. After the dedication, the crowd dispersed into the infield and enjoyed picnics, listened to speeches, and watched soldiers drill. The war was over, and Memorial Day had been founded by African Americans in a ritual of remembrance and consecration. The war, they had boldly announced, had been about the triumph of their emancipation over a slaveholders' republic. Despite the size of the event and accounts of it in the newspapers, its memory was suppressed by white Charlestonians in favor of their own version of the day. From 1876 on, after white Democrats took back control of South Carolina politics, the day's race course origin vanished. And so it was that the true story of the first Memorial Day was lost, suppressed, or intentionally forgotten and whitewashed, as has been the case for so much of our American history, especially those parts of our history related to race. That first Memorial Day, as it was celebrated by freed blacks and a handful of whites, was truly a holiday, a holy day in every sense of the term. It was a time of remembrance of the suffering of enslaved people and the long, bloody struggle for their emancipation and their freedom. Unfortunately, it was not the end of the struggle for freedom, and the work of emancipation remains far from over. As Ella Baker said, until the killing of black men, black mothers' sons, becomes as important to the rest of the country as the killing of a white mother's son, we who believe in freedom cannot rest. The false whitewashed version of Memorial Day would have us believe that the end of the Civil War meant that blacks were truly free and equal to whites in this country in every way. However, oppression has a way of persisting, changing forms, morphing into different manifestations, but essentially remaining intact and deeply buried within any given cultural, societal, or economic system. But for those of us who are, for the most part, members of the dominant, non-oppressed groups, are trained to be in denial about these many manifestations of oppression that might be, in fact, invisible to us much of the time. One of the first steps toward waking from our slumber of denial is to look at the history of our country in an open-minded way, such that we can see beyond our national myths, and in an open-hearted way, such that we can understand the experiences of those who continue to be marginalized and oppressed. It is important to understand the history of our country as an always unfolding narrative. The more perspectives that are included, the closer we come to a complete understanding of who we are as a people and a nation. It is hard work to re-examine our long-held assumptions about who we are, but it is essential work, especially if we want to grow and move forward from where we are, if we want to become unmired from our current place of reactive defensiveness and toxic denial. And this work is deeply spiritual, religious work. As Unitarian Universalists, we embrace the idea that we as humans are responsible for whatever evil or malevolence or wrongdoing that exists in the world, and that we as humans are also responsible for our own salvation by creating justice, by helping to heal those who are wounded, and by offering love and compassion to one another and to all the world. This work is done in community with others. It is a process that involves taking a good, hard look, both historically and contemporarily, at our shortcomings and living up to our promises and our highest aspirations, and then calling ourselves back into living up to those promises and aspirations, knowing that we will often, if not always, fall short, but that we will persist nonetheless. I know that we all have a lot to deal with right now. The challenges of the pandemic continue to be very, very real and overwhelming and discouraging. The recent shootings weigh heavily on all of our hearts. And ongoing war and political uncertainty continue to wreak havoc. But this Memorial Day weekend, I encourage you to take a moment to step back from our dominant national myth to gain a better perspective on the deeper meaning of this holiday, to think not just of those who died in wars, although that remembrance is crucially important and too often forgotten, but also to remember the community of freed slaves in Charleston who provided a model for grace in the aftermath of war, a model for remembering both heroism and the systems of oppression that made that heroism necessary. My hope and my prayer is that we will engage in this work together, that we will rediscover the holy part of this holiday once again, and that we will learn from our real history something important about who we are and who we might become. May it be so. Amen.
Please rise in body and spirit for a closing hymn, Hush.
Hush, hush, somebody's calling my name. Hush, hush, somebody's calling my name. Hush, hush, somebody's calling my name. Oh my Lord, what shall I do? What shall I do? It sounds like a justice. Somebody's calling my name. It sounds like
Today's designated offering will benefit Ceasefire PA, whose mission it is to end the epidemic of gun violence across the state of Pennsylvania and across our country through education, coalition building, and advocacy. If you'd like to make a gift via our online giving system, you can do so by going to sunnyhill.org and click on the button that says Online Giving, and then follow the instructions. Or you can you can give by text at 412-324-3130. Text the amount of your gift and the word special if you want your payment to benefit Ceasefire PA, or the word pledge if you want your gift to apply to your 2022 Sunnyhill Pledge. You can also mail a check if you prefer, and you can find our mailing address on our website, sunnyhill.org. For those of you who are here with us in person, we'll be passing our offering baskets in just a moment. Thank you, everyone, for your generosity. Please join me in saying the words to extinguish our chalice. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
That which is worthy of doing, create with your hands. That which is worthy of repeating, speak with a clear voice. That which is worthy of remembering, hold in your hearts. And that which is worthy of living, go and live it now. Go in peace, seeking justice.